Hello, viewers, and welcome to the channel. Uh, as you can see, my mustache is looking a bit prepubescent. That can be chalked up to a skirmish with some goblins. You guys know I'm trigger happy with the pyromancy. I'd be throwing around fireballs and shit. And so I seared my stash off. But anyways, guys, today, uh, no Wheel of Time, Knife of Dreams review. I still have to finish that book. Yes, I did. I'm still gonna finish the series before the end of the year. Okay, I know I still have 3 books left, and it's December 3rd. But trust the process. Today we have a little bit of new, different style of content to this channel. We're gonna be reading an article talking about Robert Jordan and specifically maybe his writing skills and how he crafted the Wheel of Time. Uh, and it sort of discusses, is he how does Robert Jordan stand as a writer, as someone of the craft? What are his skills? So we're gonna look through this, talk about it, discuss it, and by the end we'll decide if Robert Jordan really is, you know, a mastermind or if he's a hack writer. Like no, I'm not gonna put any author names there. All right, so our article today is Robert Jordan, genius or hack? And the author of this article we'll be discussing is Abigail Goldsmith. So, Abigail, if you're watching this, thank you for the article. It was edited in January 2003, so like a couple years ago. But let's get into it. Let's sort of uh, maybe glance over these couple few paragraphs to sort of try to summarize what how Goldsmith introduces us to the topic. All right, so in the first couple paragraphs, our author is sort of just laying the groundwork for the argument. She is discussing uh, the divisiveness of the Wheel of Time, right? How there's a lot of people who hold the Wheel of Time pretty highly in their rankings of fantasy and just, literature in general. And then we have other people who are pretty down on it and don't think it's, they see the flaws of it. They think maybe it's not a series that deserves the recognition it gets, which is wrong. So one of the main points Goldsmith makes here with why people aren't such fans of the Wheel of Time series is the female characters. Uh, as for example, let me highlight this. The women inhabitants of Randland. I've heard no one call it that ever. No, I'm just kidding. I've actually heard that. Are dull characters of feminist extremists. And I've seen this sentiment a lot online, actually. A lot of people stating how Robert Jordan handles his female characters being one of the bigger flaws of the series. And when I read this, I think of how anytime a female character is introduced in the series, right? So we got our main cast and a woman walks into the room, right? And so Robert Jordan will describe how, silky her hair is and how, beautiful her smile is. And then he'll just like drop about how she has just massive breasts. And that is actually one complaint I have with the series is sort of the objectification that goes on with the descriptions of women. Because yeah, it does feel like anytime a woman walks into the room, Robert George's talking about her breasts, and like rarely does he mention anything about butts, which I think reveals Robert Jordan to be a boob guy. That has nothing to do with this argument though. Or sorry for the tangent, but yeah, I agree with this. Sometimes I think Jordan can handle the women characters, at least when he's describing their physical appearances at first. It's a little bit, distasteful, not tasteful, when he's just talking about them folding their arms under their bosom, and that is a complaint that I see pretty frequently online that people have a little time, and rightfully so. That's a very fair criticism to have because he is kind of bad about that. Specifically, maybe the characterization of some of the women characters. Um, I think Jordan. You have to commend him for trying. I guess, especially in the era he was writing. I saw a meme the other day where in the Lord of the Rings movies, there's only like 3 words exchanged between female characters. Uh, But in the Wheel of Time, the female characters are just as big of players in the game and how it's set up as the male players, right? And we have a lot of interactions with female and female characters, and we see their decisions holding a lot of sway over the characters. I mean, the biggest example of this could be the Aes Sedai, right? The female channelers. Everyone sort of steps lightly around them, right? And so um, I think he tries to get that equal representation, but he also has some pretty interesting commentary on how the genders work, which uh, maybe sometimes could be is a little traditional in his perspective. But let's move on to the article. We're on the first two paragraphs. The next section of this article discusses how much the Wheel of Time is derivative, maybe, of Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, which again is another criticism that I've seen of the Wheel of Time series, but I don't think it's too strong of one because, like our author Abigail Goldsmith mentions, is that after the first book, it doesn't feel Tolkien-esque anymore. Jordan definitely takes the classic fantastical setting and flips it on his head, does his own thing with it. And maybe that might be part of the reason why maybe I wasn't the biggest fan of Eye of the World, but yeah, by the time you get to the Great Hunt, it's a different series. It's not Lord of the Rings, right? We get the introduction of the Shan Chan, which I think is one big thing in the Wheel of Time that sort of separates it from the Lord of the Rings, right? Because Lord of the Rings is the simple good versus evil battle, right? It's the orcs and Sauron are evil. We have our good guys trying to take them down, but the Wheel of Time's a little bit more complicated, and I think while we all love Joe Abercrombie and George R. R. Martin, let's give Robert Jordan his props. He also is one of the big contributors to having more morally gray characters present in the fantasy setting. Because like let's look at the Sean Chan, for example. That's a pretty complicated enemy. They're not necessarily completely evil. I mean, they do some pretty messed up stuff, especially with female channelers. But they're not like that purely evil mechanism of pure evil like the orcs and Saruman or Sauron. Well, Saruman's actually a pretty interesting character, but like Sauron, right? These are just like also other peoples from a different land who are going to cause trouble for our main cast later on. And so it makes things a bit more complicated than simply good versus bad. Yeah, so here, this is one thing I actually didn't catch on my first read, but Abigail Smith points to, you know, Rand's main friends from his hometown are Matt, Perrin, and Egwene, which do kind of sound like Merry, Pippin, and Éowyn, even though Éowyn really wasn't in the Shire. Uh, but again, she's a lead female character, as well as Éowyn being the only lead female. No, not the only, but one of the main lead female characters in The Lord of the Rings. And our main cast is from a small farming village, which is also pretty reminiscent of the Shire, which is pretty much a small farming village. So yeah, and then another thing I'd like to point out is, like I was mentioning with the Great Hunt, Goldsmith makes note that by the second volume, these Tolkien-esque elements all but disappear. We begin to realize that Randland is not Middle Earth by any stretch of the imagination. So again, Wheel Time, while it starts Tolkien-esque, just so Jordan could get his series published. Once he got his foothold in the publication world, he got to do his own thing. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Goldsmith also admits that Robert Jordan is in his Wheel of Time series is the or one of the main reasons she is even in touched the genre of fantasy, which maybe could show bias in this article a little bit, but I mean, let's be honest, this is a video going on a Wheel of Time channel, guys, so I will accept no criticism of the Wheel of Time. So no matter what she says, I agree. I'm also biased. Also, quick note here: Goldsmith touches on uh, the meticulous plotting of Jordan's story, which is true. I'm pretty sure he had notes for how the story was going to end before his passing, and so really, Brandon Sanderson's task was just to take the notes that Robert Jordan left him and try to put them together and make a cohesive story. But again, I could see this also being a criticism of the time, maybe because when you meticulously plot out a story, you can maybe sometimes story beats and elements of your story feel contrived, or things happen that feel like their only involvement is to progress the characters further. I think one example of this is in Knife of Dreams when Matt finds out where to free Moraine from Oliver, the little kid. He was like, "Oh yeah, Birgit told me where the tower was one time. You guys don't listen?" Like, bro, what? How? We're just getting this like game-changing information from this little kid because he overheard it from another character. It just felt a little out of place. But again, I don't think that is too prevalent in this series, though. Everything feels pretty natural. Maybe some of the miscommunication is a bit unnatural. If the characters would just hear each other out, and speak their mind. Jesus Christ, the Aes Sedai can never say what they mean and get on the same page because they're just too worried about, aura farming and being mysterious. But Wolfsmith also mentions in one of the longer paragraph sections in this article about the amount of detail that Robert Jordan throws at the reader, the amount of subtle world building he does, right? And she uses the example of Hurin mentioning a couple of the borderland nations going to war and how this just simple thing passed between dialogue comes in later to play to affect Rand. And again, this has its pros and cons as well, right? The pro is it feels like a very real lived in world, yeah, right? Because everything matters. There's things going on everywhere. It's not like the nations are only functioning when Rand walks through or when Matt or Perrin or Gwyn or Elaine, things are happening and the characters have to deal with it. It's not like everything is, following their path or helping them out. Um One small minor nitpick I have with this type of storytelling though is like I have to have the Wheel Time Compendium app on my phone because, like, I don't know, 7 books after a minor character is mentioned, they're doing something big and crazy, and I'm like, who even is this character? Because I already forgot who they were, right? So that's like one minor nitpick is that when you do these little plot building things and then you bring it back into play later on, it's sort of like it's cool for the people like binge reading the series, right? But especially back in the day when you were reading as the installments came out. That was probably seen as a fault. Also, a fan of this article here, how Goldsmith sort of presumes that Jordan probably has like a crazy like. Have you guys seen the Charlie meme from what's that show called? Always Sunny in Philadelphia. This is kind of like what Robert Jordan's doing with all of his world building. All this stuff he has to keep track of. I thought that was pretty funny. Um, well, let's look here. Goldsmith brings to light some critics, right? Some criticisms of the characterization in The Wheel of Time. Um, there's a certain sameness between all the male and all the females. I think, yeah, with some of the discussions that Robert Jordan's trying to have about gender here, it's almost like it's easier for him to talk about it when he makes all the female characters fall under one archetype and all the male characters fall under one archetype, right? Like, for example, the women mostly regard men as oafs and woolheads. I've seen this complaint online for people who don't like Nynaeve, or maybe just the main girl cast in general, which I can't tolerate Nynaeve slander. I mean, when you really think about it, uh, all the like about half the Forsaken that ran Sigan out, he would probably be dead without Nynaeve, right? A Ravine, for example. Um, I could probably name more, but yeah. So but anyways, okay. Yes, it does feel like the all women regard men as being sort of like dumb or like lesser apes or whatever, and obviously that's not true in the real world, right? There's definitely more nuanced opinions that women are gonna have on men. Not all of them are gonna think the same, and the same thing to say for the men. Not all of them are gonna think the same thing about women. So barring all those characters into having sort of the same opinion to put a message out does sort of make the characters feel a little less real and fair criticism. It's sort of what I mentioned earlier about the handling of female characters, but Goldsmith does a better job of putting it into words here. But this line right here I think is really nice. It seems that his clearly defined separation of male and female roles is a reflection of traditional sexist male viewpoint. Yeah, I think could see that being a critique some people have of the Wheel of Time. But also look at this, right? we get the introduction of Moraine Sedai, and she's like totally cool and brooding, and she's like the twist on Gandalf, right? Uh, Instead of it being this tall, like white dude with a beard and like a pretty cool staff, we get a woman. She's a small woman, but she's so imposing with her stature and how she carries herself that she feels taller than she is, which is something mentioned a lot in the series. But yeah, she says, as a woman, I'm grateful for Robert having the temerity. I've never heard of that word. I need to look that up. And skill to invent likable female role models. I've actually seen some Moraine slander, which is crazy, in my opinion. But um, to each their own. But yeah, especially with the fantasy genre at the time, I think Jordan was pretty progressive with how he handled the gender roles, or just the female gender in general. Goldsmith, near the latter half of this article, mentions two popular strengths of the Wheel of Time, which are the characters and Robert Jordan's ability to put someone into a scene, right, with his very detailed prose style. Yeah, she mentions how Elaine is someone who wants to experience the world and enjoy her life, but she also has a duty to the throne, and she has self-doubt over if she can do as good of a job as her mother has done or previous rulers. And we have Rand who will throw down a guy, make him look silly, with the power, but also he is one of the most realistic depictions of the chosen one archetype, right? Because he has self-doubts and he is just a kind kid from a small town. Um, I mean, people want to bring up Anakin Skywalker, right? But by the end of the story, he doesn't get the girl, and he gets turned into an action figure. I mean, Rand has three wives, bro. Who's the better chosen one? No, not that the shows better chosen should be determined by that, but Rand just feels like such a genuine portrayal of this archetype, which is one of the reasons I myself have been drawn to reading the books, along with, you know, Nynaeve's development from it not having to control everything or and being able to trust others and rely on others, right? Which was a big step in her character, was going from trying to do everything herself, not asking for help, to being willing to accept that help from others, right? And that's something, I personally can relate to. And in concerns to Jordan's very detailed prose, Goldsmith says here, uh, when mist gathers on Tomon Head, the reader feels it. When shanty huts are built by war refugees outside the sober fortress city of Caerhine, the reader is put right there watching the dusty windows and children whose husbands died in ale attacks. Again, very lived in world, great world building, and great descriptions from Robert Jordan. There are some critics who complain that Jordan is too descriptive. I agree. He revels in description, and I love every minute of it. Yeah, yeah. Again, like Goldsmith said here, sometimes the over description just you know puts the reader into a world that is foreign but feels realistic. Like this world has a history, right? And then sometimes we enter a room and he describes all of the gilding on every chair and every chest and like how it smells and like every room. Which so again, that sometimes it works in his favor, sometimes not so much. Especially with a book like Crossroads of Twilight, when already nothing's happening and you're just describing stuff. Um, let's look at these two final paragraphs here. The series, I believe, has the potential to be the greatest work of fantasy ever written to date. So I don't think this series was completed in 2003. Um, I can't remember when the last book was published. Time will tell. Unfortunately, the cover art is a major point of dissuasion to new readers. I suspect that Jordan would have a much larger audience if the artist depicted actual scenes from the books. The female characters in Jordan's world are powerful, but the covers portray them as simpering stereotypes. Yeah, I actually kind of like some of the older covers for that old fantasy feel, but yeah, some of the characters they're not even book accurate. Like Rand has blonde hair in all the covers, but I mean I'm pretty sure he has red hair in the books. Um, yeah. So that's also I think they have a few newer covers out. There's the ones that have like the characters in them, just like a little like square in the middle of the book that's depicting a scene from the story. And then there's also another set I think came out in the UK, which is just like a complete set with the just artwork, no characters on it. So which I'm not really a big fan of that one. But last paragraph. Lately, Robert Jordan has been talking about starting another gigantic epic series, or even going back to publish prequels. This scares me. Not because I'm not eager to get addicted to new books, but because I'm afraid he might give up the will of time. Okay, so this strikes relevance today. Look at George R. R. Martin, who hasn't finished, Game of Thrones. So it's kind of interesting to see that this was a similar sentiment people were having back then with the Wheel of Time, and I'm sure once it was now announced that Robert Jordan passed away, that fear only increased. If anybody watched this video was around when those books were being released, put in the comments how what was the air like around when Robert Jordan passed, like what I'm sure there was a lot of worry over if the series would be finished or not. Um, and he actually sort of talks more about like Imagine if Stephen King, if he only took the short stories of Tolkien only, never finished writing Lord of the Rings. Um, and actually, this is I want to talk about how he discussions of another epic series. Yeah, in interviews, Jordan did already have another series planned after the Wheel of Time, to begin. Before he did eventually pass away, which is kind of sad because you know, from someone who created something as timeless as the Wheel of Time, it would have been, equally awesome to see what else he could have made, and it really is a shame that he left us so soon. And that concludes the article discussion, or at least what was in the article. Put in the comments below, what do you think about Robert Jordan as a writer, right? Obviously he didn't have the literary background of some. He didn't go to an MFA program. He got a physics degree from one of the military academies. No, I can't think of it right now. So it's like he didn't have that he didn't have a scholarly background, but he didn't have the literary backgrounds. So maybe he doesn't have the most flowery and majestic prose, right? But Jordan is a master class in plotting, right? You can make the art for all the plotters out there and not the pantsers. Robert Jordan is a great example of plotting a story and it's still turning out feeling natural, and being very, very layered, um, in that regard. Again, there's also the arguments on, George's depiction of women, and maybe that could have been sort of a product of his time, being influenced by, when he first started the series, which doesn't excuse it, of course. But, you know, just for a little bit of literary analysis, why maybe that might be. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and hopefully next week we'll have Knife of Dreams finished, and we can do the review on that and get on to The Gathering Storm. Again, everybody, uh, the Roland Quince Media channel, the Bookman channel, this is the hub for Wheel of Time content. There's Daniel Green out there. There's uh Library of a Viking, but listen, this is the place for the Wheel of Time content. Like just because their videos are better quality and they go into more depth and detail and they have a better way with words than me, doesn't mean that their content's better. So um thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week.